From LPM,
Louisville Public Media.
Support for this podcast comes from LG&E, with a reminder that the warning signs of a gas leak are the smell of rotten eggs, dead plants near healthy plants, or a hissing sound. Leave immediately and call 911. More gas safety tips at lge-ku.com/gas safety.
Meta is investing $600 billion in AI infrastructure, bringing jobs to communities across America. Phil, a Meta building engineer in Las Lunas, New Mexico, says,
welcoming Meta into our community is creating more opportunities.
Learn more at meta.com/buildingamerica.
Welcome to On Track. I'm Aisha Jaffer. Across Kentucky, families are feeling the squeeze. The cost of living keeps rising while wages have barely moved. So what's driving up essential cost here in Kentucky? Why are wages and the state's minimum wage struggling to keep up with inflation? And what should Kentuckians be watching as we head into the holiday season? Joining me is Jason Bailey, founder and executive director of the Kentucky Center for Economic Policy, a progressive think tank which studies how state and federal decisions shape household budgets across the Commonwealth. I spoke with Jason about what's driving the increase in essential costs across Kentucky, how inflation and stagnant wages are reshaping household budgets, and what we should be watching as we head into this holiday season. So we know life is getting more expensive across the board, but what are the main factors driving that increase in essential cost and inflation here in Kentucky?
Well, there are several things going on. We saw a rapid increase in prices during the COVID-19 pandemic, and that had in part to do with shortages in the supply chain for a variety of goods. It had to do with changes in the way people bought things. They bought fewer services, more goods. We see more industries where there are monopolies operating and able to control prices. And so that sent prices up pretty substantially. Of course, inflation tends to, send prices up. They typically don't come back down with a few exceptions. So we've had higher prices. As a result, inflation growth has slowed, but those increases are still affecting people. And we're still seeing increases in the price of housing, in the price of groceries, in the price of homeowners insurance. And there are just a number of factors that have to do with the markets for those particular goods and services, the ways in which climate change is impacting costs. There are a lot of things going on.
So it's a myriad of things that are kind of contributing to this. But I'm just curious, when we're thinking about Kentucky, which spending categories such as housing, food, childcare, energy costs are really putting the most pressure on Kentucky families right now?
Well, housing is, of course, the largest item in typically any household budget, right? Be it to pay rent or to pay a mortgage, plus to pay insurance and utilities costs associated with that. So, that tends to be what people report as the largest burden. If you look at what the Consumer Price Index reports for shelter, which includes a number of those things, up 32% over the last 5 years. So, electricity costs have been going up a lot. I mean, I think that's something you will hear a lot about. And then certainly food, that we've seen particularly in with meat, eggs, poultry, some real increases in those costs in recent years. So it's not any one thing, but it's the staples of any household's budget.
Yeah, and like you said, there's so many factors that are fueling this, from purchasing power, and then we'll get into policy, but I know you mentioned climate change right, and the hope for that. So it seems to be a really hard time right now for everybody.
Absolutely. And the sort of the other side of the equation is income, wages and income. If incomes had been rising at least as much or more than the cost of household goods, you wouldn't hear people being as upset about it. But it's definitely been the case that wages have not kept up. They, in fact, haven't kept up for decades for most workers. And so that just adds to the pinch.
Yeah, that's exactly what I wanted to ask, because Kentucky's minimum wage has been stuck at $7.25 an hour since 2009. Your team at the Kentucky Center for Economic Policy found that if it had kept up with inflation, Kentuckians would be earning about $14.70 an hour today, more than double the current rate. How did we get here, and why has the minimum wage stayed frozen for so long?
Yeah, this is the longest time in history in which the minimum wage has not gone up. It's essentially been decisions both in Washington at the congressional level as well as in the legislature, not to increase that minimum. It's still $7.25 an hour. Essentially, we've all but abolished the minimum wage because it's so low that it's far below what people are making. So you want a minimum wage that's high enough to push wages up at the bottom for those workers who are in those jobs where they really just don't make enough to make ends meet. So we've lost that. Oh, we've also not increased the minimum wage for tipped workers since 1991. It's still stuck at $2.13 an hour. Our reliance on tips is very volatile, very unpredictable, and many tipped workers don't make enough to get by. So that's one of the huge problems we have is that, this minimum bar that is in place just hasn't been updated to reflect these rising costs.
And how we got there, that's policy related?
It's a decision. The minimum wage is a law that has to be updated, increased by legislative bodies at the state or federal level. There were attempts at the local level in Kentucky. There were ordinances passed in Lexington and Louisville to increase the local minimum wage, but the legislature has essentially blocked that from happening. So even at the local level, there's not the ability to do that. This really lies in the hands of the legislators and the members of Congress.
Do you know the drive behind why they would block this?
I think businesses don't want to pay more than they have to. Minimum wage is in place because, if it wasn't, we would see people, making far less than they need. It allows them to undercut other workers. And so it's a way to create more equity in the overall economy. And there are powerful business lobbies that are absolutely opposed to there being a minimum wage, much less increasing it.
With this figure, that means the minimum wage has lost about half its purchasing power since it was last raised. What does that gap between wages and the real cost of living look like for Kentuckians? And how does that ripple through the broader economy?
In Kentucky, you've got about 20% of workers who make less than $15 an hour. So when people don't have money in their pockets to spend, that affects obviously their standard of living, the standard of living of their household, members of their family, but also how much money is spent at grocery stores, at hardware stores, at local restaurants, local grocery stores, local businesses of various kinds. That money circulates through the economy, it creates jobs. There are ripple effects. When people don't have money to spend, then there's less that's being circulated locally. And where has that money gone? One may ask. It's really gone to the people at the top. The owners of these corporations, the shareholders. The incomes at the top are soaring. We're creating more billionaires every day. The stock market has increased dramatically the last couple of years, and those folks already tend to be very well off, and they don't spend much of their income. It sort of continues to pile up, so it doesn't circulate in the economy and create jobs.
So what state or federal decisions have had the biggest impact on what Kentuckians are experiencing right now economically then?
One of the big issues when it comes to the wages side of the picture, besides the minimum wage, is the ability to form unions. And there are large numbers of people who say they would join a union if they could. The unionization rates, though, have been declining because essentially federal labor law makes it extremely hard to organize a union. That's an issue where policy could step in and allow people that right. And it would do a lot because it would allow workers to then bargain with their employers collectively better for wages. Then on the cost of living side, there are a lot of things that need to be done. We need to build more housing. One of the reasons housing is so unaffordable is there's not enough of it. More of it's been bought up by speculators who are using it as a speculative asset. There's more that's been taken off the housing market to use for rental or temporary housing, Airbnbs and so forth. We don't have enough investment in public housing. We don't have enough investment in affordable housing. And so, that's an issue where policy is needed to step in to increase the supply. When you increase the supply, it affects the prices of the homes and the rental apartments that are available.
Thinking about this and heading into the holidays, what does this economic moment mean for Kentuckians balancing, seasonal expenses with rising everyday costs?
Well, the big issue that's going into effect now is that the tariffs that the Trump administration has been putting in place on goods from all over the world are really going into effect, and we're starting to see those impact on prices. So as people head into the holidays, that affects the cost of Thanksgiving dinner. It affects the cost of Christmas toys, Christmas presents, a wide variety of services. So on top of already strained households facing affordability challenges, the tariffs threaten to raise costs further. We're also seeing a lack of action on things like extending subsidies to help people buy health insurance on Connect. That is making health costs go up for about 100,000 Kentuckians. There's also been difficulty accessing, and will be more difficulty accessing in the new year, SNAP food assistance for various folks, more difficulty accessing Medicaid for people's healthcare costs. All those things make the basics of life, whether that's getting a prescription drug or buying the weekly groceries, much more expensive. So it's not the case that this problem at the moment is likely to get better. It's likely to get worse.
What are your thoughts about the impact of a stimulus check?
There were several stimulus checks that were sent out during the COVID-19 pandemic, and they did help folks, but, temporarily. In fact, there was a lot of aid that went to people during the pandemic, but when that went away, and Congress didn't keep those things going, the hardship came back. And that's one of the reasons that folks are frustrated. They saw for a moment there what it means when the government steps in and provides food assistance or provides a monthly child tax credit, which was available at that time. A stimulus check can help in a moment. It certainly can help bridge some gaps, but it's not the long-term economic security that families really want and need.
So as we look ahead to the new year, what trends or policy changes could Kentuckians be watching for, or should Kentuckians be watching for?
Well, I think there's going to be a big debate about healthcare on into 2026 and beyond. Healthcare continues to be a real challenge. The expiration of the subsidies to help people buy Affordable Care Act coverage is a huge burden for many small business employees and individuals and others. The housing challenges are not going to go away until we build more housing. That's an ongoing pressure. I think there has to be more done to sort of look into the monopolies that control things like meat processing and other industries and sort of are able to control and increase prices, frankly, as a profit-making strategy because we lack competitive markets. And there are things like, over the years, things like childcare and like higher education that have just become out of reach for so many people. And that impacts lives in both the short and long term. So I think affordability is the issue in 2026 that everyone should be talking about. There are solutions at the state and federal level that can be pursued. It just requires the leadership that will take those on.
And then just kind of talking broadly, because I feel like a lot of these issues are national. It's not Kentucky specific. Is there something, though, that is Kentucky specific economically that's different from the national trends?
Well, there are a lot of things that Kentucky can do. We have an affordable housing trust fund that could build more housing. We haven't put much money into it. We could absolutely do that. We have a public service commission that controls electricity prices. They could do more to make sure those prices are affordable, that all the energy efficiency options are being pursued so that people's electricity bills are something they can afford. The state could also be doing more to crack down on the price of prescription drugs or, the ability of folks to pay down medical debt. There are lots of things actually that can be done at the state level. It just requires, that affordability and the everyday kitchen table issues that families face become the focus.
For listeners who want to stay informed, what resources or organizations would you recommend for understanding or navigating these economic changes?
Well, at the Kentucky Center for Economic Policy, we put out, and we will have more out around the affordability issue and the kind of policy solutions that are needed. There's important work to be done in the 2026 General Assembly around sort of preventing additional price spikes, as well as doing some things to make the problem better overall. Other than that, we need to be supporting those local efforts that are immediate help to people, whether that's food banks, whether that's homeless shelters, whether that's programs that help people with utility assistance. There are lots of things that at a local level can be done to help stem the crisis as we go through the winter, for example. Those solutions are critical, but ultimately they're not enough if we don't also have government action.
Well, Jason, thank you so much for joining me today.
Yeah, thank you for having me.
On Track is produced by Louisville Public Media. Our production team includes Michelle Tyreen Johnson, Laura Ellis, and me, Aisha Jaffer, with support from Amina Alahi, Sarah Kelly, and Alex Biscardi. Our music is by Kojin Toshiro. Find more at LouisvilleOnTrack.org, and remember, being kind is free. That's the start of community. Thanks for listening.
Support for this podcast comes from LG&E and KU, who know that when the lights go out, it can feel like a full court press. But staying in the know is an easy win. Update your phone number in the LG&E and KU mobile app or in My Account. If the power goes out, you'll get play-by-play texts from 454-358 with outage updates, safety information, and time estimates for power restoration. Can't text? No problem. They'll call the landline on your account with the same updates. So you're never left in the dark. More at lgne-ku.com/outages.
Hi, I'm Morgan Sung, host of Close All Tabs from KQED, where every week we reveal how the online world collides with everyday life.
But that was so fun that it fried my dopamine receptors.
There was this 6-foot cartoon otter who came out from behind a curtain.
It actually really matters that driverless cars are going to mess up in ways that humans wouldn't.
I think we will see a Twitch streamer president maybe within our lifetimes.
You can find Close All Tabs wherever you listen to podcasts.